One of the establishment's favorite tactics to counter 9/11 truth is to claim that it hurts the feelings of the victims of 9/11 and their families to bring up alternative theories. Bill Doyle is the head of the Coalition of 9/11 Families, the largest 9/11 victims organization. He reported to us that the majority of the members of his group believe that 9/11 is an inside job and that they're sick and tired of the massive concerted effort to cover up the truth by the controlled corporate press and the government. This is a very important point because the controlled media continues to claim that victims and their families don't want questions raised about 9/11. Every single 9/11 group we've talked to wants the investigation reopened and believes that there is a cover-up at the bare minimum. Bill Christensen was formerly the head of the CIA's Department of Foreign Threat Assessment. He has said that all the evidence points towards a total inside job. Former CIA clandestine case officer Robert Steele has gone on record saying there's enough evidence to indict Dick Cheney for involvement in 9/11. In early June of 2006, we traveled to Chicago to meet with fellow 9/11 truth seekers and expose the official story as a fraud.
You cannot hide the truth. You will not hide the truth. It's coming out. Your crimes are coming out. Ladies and gentlemen, 9/11 is an inside job. It's a self-inflicted war. It's a government false flag terror operation. Research it. More people are waking up every single day. More people realize what the stakes are. They love their families, and they understand that the government is carrying out terrorist attacks as a pretext to re-engineer America into a police state. Why? To capture us to be their political slaves, to use us as an engine of global empire, to invade the planet.
While in Chicago, we had a chance to again speak with former MI5 agent Andy Michon.
I'm convinced that 9/11 was an inside job. And there are a number of compelling reasons why I think it was an inside job. Primarily, the collapse of the Twin Towers, which look to me to be controlled demolitions. Also the collapse of Building 7, the World Trade Center complex. Also the fact that the air defences were stood down that day, who benefited from the attacks, of course. So there were a lot of put options put on the airlines that suffered during those attacks. So a whole range of different evidence that adds up to something very, very suspicious about 9/11. I feel passionately that we need to expose the government involvement in 9/11, because if we don't, they will keep doing this in future. There will be another attack in order to justify another unjustifiable war.
We also spoke with Dr. Morgan Reynolds.
No matter how much our inert public wants to avoid this, it's eating away. It's willful denial, willful ignorance. It's eating away at the underbelly of America. And we aren't going to solve our problems by ignoring 9/11. The biggest smoking gun then and now is WTC-7. How can anyone watch it without some kind of a psyop or verbiage accompanying it and not look at that and say, hey, that building was just demolished, just the way the Las Vegas Sands was, or the Seattle Stadium, etc. Just there's no way around that. Here we are in so-called broad daylight. It's 5:20 p.m. and we've got cameras on it. And what other explanation can there be for this very conventional-looking collapse when under 7 seconds? That just has crime, inside job written all over it. We need real convictions. We need arrests. We need prosecutions.
We also had a chance to speak to Professor Stephen Jones, who is a doctor of physics, concerning new bombshell evidence that conclusively proves that thermite was used to cut the main pillars in the World Trade Center towers.
There is this molten metal, molten material flowing out of the South Tower just before its collapse. It has a large quantity of yellow hot metal. And then I read about these pools of molten metal underneath both towers and Building 7 after their collapses. Now that fits like a glove with the thermite reaction, which produces molten iron. You also see in these videos of this molten metal coming up, you see this white ash, this dust that comes off. Now that combination, yellow hot molten metal, white ash floating away, that's his signature characteristic for thermite. And then finally, we got some samples of this metal, the previously molten metal. Using advanced techniques like proton-induced X-ray emission and an electron microprobe, we found out what's in these samples. We're finding iron, also sulfur, potassium, and manganese. And these are characteristic of a variation of thermite, which is used to cut through steel very rapidly. It's called thermate. It's like, sure, you can take a knife, you take the butter out of the fridge, and you cut through that butter. Now, adding sulfur to thermite and also potassium permanganate, these chemicals, it's like heating up your knife to a very high temperature. Now it slices right through the butter. Even if the butter is cold, slices right through. Same way here, by adding sulfur and potassium permanganate to thermite, it'll now slice through structural steel very rapidly. But the end products then, you'll have sulfur, and potassium, manganese, and iron. And that's what we see. Thermite had to be planted in the buildings, which of course implies directly an inside job. Someone had to have access into the buildings.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
From a volcano.
We spoke with former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura to get his perspective on 9/11. Ventura has told the press that he is so concerned about the attack on the Bill of Rights in this country that he has now moved to Mexico and believes the country is sliding into full-bore fascism. I would just like to get your view, your take on 9/11, Gulf of Tonkin, JFK, all of it.
Well, I think the most interesting thing to talk about today is, if people aren't aware, that due to the Freedom of Information Act, in the early 60s, the Pentagon had an operation called Operation Northwoods, and it never came to reality, but it was on the table, that our military would attack certain cities within the United States and make it look like Cuba did it to justify an invasion of Cuba. It never happened, but just the simple fact that they contemplated it and it was actually on the table in the Pentagon, I find that just very disturbing, that they would, even consider using our military to try to justify an invasion of another country.
You did speak on Jay Leno, according to my recollection, about how Gulf of Tonkin was staged, how you were lied to, we were lied to, you lost a lot of friends. What was it like to learn that they had staged an event that didn't really happen to bring us into full-scale war in '64? What was it like when you realized that and you learned that?
Well, it was very disappointing to believe in your country that they would lie to you to get into a war, that they would perpetrate a lie and that the media would go along with it. It's a real eye-opener, and you realize that if they would do it in the 60s, they'll do it again. If it works once, it'll work again. Government very much operates that way, and I really learned about it when McNamara did his tour with the film, and he came to Harvard when I was teaching there, and they pretty much had to lock me up in a room so that I wouldn't confront him. And
what would you say to him if you were in a room with him?
I would ask him why we were lied to and what the purpose was for it. The one thing I do question on 9/11 is the fact that if anyone's familiar with the Payne Stewart, the golfer, and when he died, he was flying